Okay, so we're about halfway through the book now, so it might be a good idea to just pause this video and just see if you can summarise what's happened so far. So give that a try now. Okay, so I'll do the same. Basically, we've got Mr. and Mrs. Twit, and they're both very disgusting and very, very unkind to one another. And they play tricks on each other, like the glass eye trick, or the frog in the bed, or eating worm spaghetti. Mr. Twit also tricked Mrs. Twit into thinking she was shrinking and convinced her that she needed to be stretched. And then when she came back from being stretched, she was really cross with him. And then we heard a little bit about the house that they live in and their garden, and how they use the big dead tree to catch birds by putting glue on it, and they catch the birds like that. Okay, so now we can see the second part of the story. Okay, so the Great Upside Down Monkey Circus. Now for the monkeys. The 4 monkeys in the garden were all one family. They were Muggerwump and his wife and their 2 small children. But what on earth were Mr. and Mrs. Twit doing with monkeys in their garden? Well, in the old days, they had both worked in a circus as monkey trainers. They used to teach the monkeys to do tricks and to dress up in human clothes and to smoke pipes and all the rest of that nonsense. Today, although they were retired, Mr. and Mrs. Twit, Mr. Twit still wanted to train monkeys. It was his dream that one day he would own the first great upside-down monkey circus in the world. That meant that the monkeys had to do everything upside down. They had to dance upside down, on their hands with their feet in the air. They had to play football upside down. They had to balance one on top of the other upside down, with Muggerwump at the bottom and the smallest baby monkey on the very top. They even had to eat and drink upside down. And that is not an easy thing to do, because the food and water has to go up your throat instead of down it. In fact, it is almost impossible, but the monkeys simply had to do it, otherwise they got nothing. This all sounds pretty silly to you and me. It sounded pretty silly to the monkeys too. They absolutely hated having to do this upside down nonsense day after day. It made them giddy standing on their heads for hours on end. Sometimes the 2 small monkey children would faint with so much blood going to their head, but Mr. Twit didn't care about that. He kept them practicing for 6 hours every day, and if they didn't do as they were told, Mrs. Twit would soon come running out with her beastly stick. The roly-poly bird to the rescue. Muggerwump and his family longed to escape from the cage in Mr. Twit's garden and go back to the African jungle where they came from. They hated Mr. and Mrs. Twit for making their lives so miserable. They also hated them for what they did to the birds every Tuesday and Wednesday. "Fly away, birds," they used to shout, jumping about in the cage and waving their arms. "Don't sit on that big dead tree. It's just been smeared with sticky glue. Go and sit somewhere else." But these were English birds, and they couldn't understand the African language that the monkeys spoke. So they took no notice and went on using the big dead tree and getting caught for Mrs. Twit's bird pie. Then one day a truly magnificent bird flew down from the sky and landed on the monkey cage. "Good heavens," cried all the monkeys together. "It's the roly-poly bird. What on earth are you doing over here in England, roly-poly bird?" Like the monkeys, the roly-poly bird came from Africa, and he spoke the same language as they did. "I've come for a holiday," said the roly-poly bird. "I like to travel." He fluffed his marvellous coloured feathers and looked down rather grandly at the monkeys. "For most people," he went on to say, flying away on holiday is very expensive, but I can fly anywhere in the world for nothing." "Do you know how to talk to these English birds?" Muggerwump asked him. "Of course I do," said the roly-poly bird. "It's no good going to a country and not knowing the language." "Then we must hurry," said Muggerwump. "Today is Tuesday, and over there you can already see the revolting Mr. Twit up the ladder, painting sticky glue on the branches of the big dead tree. This evening, when the birds come in to roost, you must warn them not to perch on that tree, or they'll be made into bird pie." That evening the roly-poly bird flew around and around the big dead tree, singing out, "There's sticky stuff all over the tree. If you land in the branches, you'll never get free. So fly away, stand up high, or you'll finish up in tomorrow in a hot bird pie. No bird pie for Mr. Twit. The next morning, when Mr. Twit came out with his huge basket to snatch all of the birds from the big dead tree, there wasn't a single one on it. They were all sitting on top of the monkey cage. The roly-poly bird was there as well, and Muggerwump and his family were inside the cage, and the whole lot of them were laughing at Mr. Twit. Still no bird pie for Mr. Twit. Mr. Twit wasn't going to wait another week for his bird pie supper. He loved bird pie. It was his favourite meal. So that very same day he went after the birds again. This time he smeared all the top bars of the monkey cage with sticky glue, as well as the branches of the big dead tree. Now I'll get you, he said, whichever one you sit on. The monkeys crouched inside their cage, watching all this, and later on, when the roly-poly bird came swooping in for an evening chat, they shouted out, "Don't land on our cage, roly-poly bird, it's covered in sticky glue, so is the tree." And that evening, as the sun went down and all the birds came in to roost, the roly-poly bird flew round and around the monkey cage and the big dead tree, singing out his warning. "There's sticky stuff now on the cage and the tree. If you land on either, you'll never get free. So fly away, stand up high, or you'll finish up tomorrow in a hot bird pie." Mr. and Mrs. Twit go off to buy guns. The next morning, when Mr. Twit came out with his huge basket, not a single bird was sitting on either the monkey cage or the big dead tree. They were all perched happily on the roof of Mr. Twit's house. The roly-poly bird was up there as well, and the monkeys were in the cage, and the whole lot of them were hooting with laughter at Mr. Twit. "Ah, wipe that silly look off your beaks," Mr. Twit screamed at the birds. "I'll get you next time, you filthy feathery frumps. I'll wring your necks, the lot of you, and you'll be bubbling in the pot for bird pie before the day is out." "How are you going to do that?" asked Mrs. Twit, who had come outside to see what all the noise was about. "I won't have you smearing glue all over the roof of our house." Mr. Twit got very excited. "I've got a great idea," he cried. He didn't bother to keep his voice down because he didn't think that the monkeys could understand. "We'll both go into town right away and we'll buy a gun each," he shouted. "How's that?" "Brilliant!" cried Mrs. Twit, grinning and showing her long yellow teeth. "We'll buy those big shotguns and spray about 50 bullets or more with each bang." "Exactly," said Mr. Twit. "Lock up the house while we go and make sure the monkeys are safely shut away." Mr. Twit went over to the monkey cage. "Attention!" he barked in his fearsome monkey trainer voice. "Upside down, all of you. Jump to it, one on top of the other. Quick, get on with it, or you'll feel Mrs. Twit stick across your backsides." Obediently, the poor monkeys stood on their hands and clambered one on top of the other, with Muggerwump at the bottom and the smallest child on the very top. "Now stay there till we come back," Mr. Twit ordered. "Don't you dare move, and don't overbalance. When we return in 2 or 3 hours' time, I shall expect to find you in exactly the same position as you are now. You understand?" With that, Mr. Twit marched away, Mrs. Twit with him, and the monkeys were left alone with the birds. Okay, we'll leave it there, find out what happens to the monkeys. They're all upside down at the moment. We'll see what happens next.